to Mars due to the mass requirements of the missions. We're learning a lot as we go forward, not only about the analysis of this, but also about perseverance that's right now on Mars. So now with the conceptual design phase nearing completion and following the mission definition review, we have a path forward using a revised and innovative architecture. We reached our decision based on new studies and recent achievements at Mars that allowed us to consider options that frankly weren't available to us 1 year ago or before. This new architecture relies on the Perseverance rover as the primary delivery system to bring samples to the sample retrieval lander, where ESA's sample transfer arm will load the sample tubes into the Mars Ascent vehicle built by the United States. And we're adding 2 Ingenuity-class helicopters as backups to transport the samples to the lander. The successful operational demonstration of the Ingenuity helicopters on Mars, frankly, was key to allowing us to consider and adapt to this change. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague and friend, David Parker, the Director of Human and Robotic Exploration at ESA, you've introduced, Karen, our partner in this effort, to discuss ESA's very important contribution to the Mars Sample Return Program, including the sample transfer arm and the Earth Return Orbiter. David.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and good day to everyone from my side. Yes, thank you very much. It's great to have the opportunity to participate in this update on the Mars Sample Return Program. It is for ESA a very exciting program and a very important partnership with our friends at NASA. I would say that Mars Sample Return is a unique mission because it combines both scientific and exploration goals by returning what I say are priceless scientific treasure from the red planet that will be studied in laboratories here on Earth worldwide for the next 50 years. It will answer fundamental questions about Mars, its early history, and its relationship with the Earth and indeed the whole of the solar system. A very, very simple example, but an important one. It will allow for the very first time absolute age dating of rock and soil taken from a known geological context on the red planet, and therefore provide ground truth that calibrate the age of all of the features of Mars for the first time. So at the same time, Mars Sample Return is you can think of it as an essential precursor or a stepping stone to an eventual human mission to Mars by demonstrating the engineering and operations of a complex multi-element mission up to 400 million kilometers from Earth. So I give you just one engineering and one scientific example to emphasize this point. ESA's Earth Return Orbiter that we're building right now, it's well into its Phase B and past the preliminary design review. The Earth Return Orbiter ERO is a multi-stage spacecraft equipped with both chemical and solar electric propulsion, more powerful than has ever been used on any previous planetary mission. So it's a technological challenge. But aboard the Earth Return Orbiter will be a radiation sensor being developed by one of our participating states in ESA, the European Space Agency. That's Hungary. And they will be this instrument will measure the total radiation dose experienced over the whole mission. So traveling to Mars, operating Mars, and returning home to Earth. And this will therefore provide important information to assess the risk to future human explorers. So having set the context of the Mars Sample Return Program, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Jeff Gramling from NASA, who is the Mars Sample Return Program Manager there. Jeff, please.
All right, thank you, David, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. We've reached a significant milestone in this campaign to return samples from Mars. Of course, the architecture for that campaign, beginning with Perseverance, is really designed to go where the scientists want to go to collect the samples to answer the questions that are being asked. Of course, we've already collected, Perseverance has already collected 9 scientifically selected samples that are there and ready to be brought home. On July 15th, completed the mission design or the mission definition review, looking at the overall program, including the architecture, the requirements, mission or the organization, risk, and schedule. As Thomas described, key to our new architecture is a recent assessment of Perseverance's reliability and life expectancy based on its performance to date. And that assessment also took into account the performance of Curiosity. It's nearing its 10th year of operation on Mars. There's much shared heritage in the mobility system. Based on that updated assessment, we have confidence that the rover will be available to deliver samples to the sample retrieval lander in 2030 when we need it to be. So it's the primary path. Recent operations of the Ingenuity helicopter on Mars, which have completed 29 flights, 24 more than originally planned, have shown us the usefulness and potential of rotorcraft on Mars. In recent months, studies conducted at JPL have evaluated the possibility of adding Ingenuity-class helicopters to retrieve samples and to deliver them to our lander. With those studies, we are confident in adding helicopters to perform the role of backup to Perseverance and transporting the sample tubes to the sample retrieval lander. The two Ingenuity-class helicopters will be carried to Mars on the deck of our lander. The single lander will also carry the Mars ascent vehicle and the ESA-provided sample transfer arm. The plan for Perseverance is to drive to the landing location of the sample retrieval lander. There, ESA's sample transfer arm will extract the samples from Perseverance and load those samples into the Mars ascent vehicle. While we're adding helicopters as backups, many components of the program have not changed from the original architecture. We have a single sample retrieval lander now augmented with the Ingenuity-class helicopters, the Mars ascent vehicle, the sample transfer arm, and ESA's Earth return orbiter with the NASA-provided capture, containment, and return system. All of those remain unchanged.
Bueno, de apuro esto se nos pasó, le estaba previsto. La teleconferencia esta, voy a bajar un poquito el volumen. En realidad la teleconferencia esta se refiere al retorno de muestras de NASA. Vamos a poner un poquito, que lo único que hay es, estoy poniendo en este momento, de qué se trata, ¿no? Esto es lo único que muestra la NASA porque están todos vía telefónica. Thomas Oruken, que es quien lidera esta en Europa con la gente de esa. Están previendo de que el rover Perseverance va a seguir activo para el 2030 cuando puedan tener quizás la posibilidad de recuperar esas muestras y encontrarse los vehículos, que es fundamental. O sea, que esté hasta el 2030 es una garantía para quien manda, para quienes van a mandar todo eso. Y recuerden también que ya comenzaron los contratos y la construcción de parte del sistema para traer las muestras.
Approach this orbiting sample carefully and capture it before bringing it back to Earth, where basically in the desert of Utah, samples will be recovered and transferred into a safe and controlled place for later utilization.
Quien está hablando ahora es David Parker, el director de exploración robótica y humana de Esta.
It's comparable to a human arm actually. It is equipped with a gritter at the end, which is able to catch samples from Perseverance. Initially, it was also designed, of course, to catch samples from sample fetch rover, and it is now being adapted to catch samples from the gripping helicopters as well. The contract was signed in July, so very, very recently, at the opportunity of the Farnborough Air Show in the UK, with a company in Italy called Leonardo. It's an international group that has also a branch in space robotics. Now, sample fetch rover is until now one of our development, and we have reached PDR. But we've been working very hard with NASA over the last 16 months, I would say, to try to consider, to reevaluate what will make the mission ultra reliable. In order we build the maximum level of confidence into a safe return of the sample we want to return for scientific exploitation. And finally decided that the best for the mission was to discontinue sample fetch rover. Why? Also because at that time we had a very clear understanding of the extreme reliability of the Perseverance rover, which is or was in itself designed and conceived to bring the samples to the bottom of the landing platform where ST would be able to fetch from Perseverance the samples and hand them over to the Mars ascent vehicle that was mentioned before by Thomas. So by doing that, we limit, of course, risk to the overall mission, and we also avoid significant extra cost because we can return to the very initial concept where we had only one single lander within the system. Now, by the way, this is the configuration we've been reviewing 2 weeks ago at the level of the mission definition review together with NASA, where the program was exposed to a board of experts who had basically to consider the work done until now and the capability of the teams to switch from a phase A to a phase B. And the review was quite successful, even though we collected a number of very good hints on how to make the mission more secure and more reliable. Now, I would like to say that until now, let's say this cooperation has really started in 2020. This is the time when we signed the memorandum of understanding. So we have already quite a significant experience to deal with each other, especially with my colleague Jeff, who is in the group as well.
Después de decir todo lo que ha dicho, agregó que no dijo nada, hasta hizo un recuento. Lo importante es que dice que están en la etapa de diseño, que obviamente sí están en la etapa de diseño del programa este. Tienen previsto que en septiembre de este año finalizan la etapa de presentación de arquitectura de propuestas.
To mention as an introduction.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. We will move on to the questions portion. However, I do think we have an update about the samples. So I was going to toss Thomas to give us an update about where Perseverance is.
Thomas Urbu, que me hablar algo sobre el tema de las muestras.
Mary, if I just kick this to my colleague who's also here, who is not a speaker right now, but is, of course, thinking about these samples more than anybody else, and that's of course, Minnie Wadwa, who's the MSR principal scientist. Minnie, do you want to do the update quickly and tell us what happened last night? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thomas. We've actually got an incredible sample
para hablar de las muestras.
Selected to address some of the highest priority science questions, as David Parker said, priceless scientific treasure.
Que las muestras son un tesoro científico.
Samples that have already been sealed and stored, and 11 samples that we are in the process of doing so. These represent an amazing suite of materials. The latest one, in fact, is a fine-grained sedimentary rock that we hopefully, will contain some of the has the greatest potential for preserving biosignatures potentially. And so. We have, again, a diversity of materials already in the bag, so to speak, and really excited about the potential for bringing these back.
Great. Thank you so much. And now we really will go to the Q&A portion. So I'm going to toss it quickly
de preguntas y respuestas.
Operator, Becca,
no quedamos habilitados, entramos tarde, no estamos habilitados.
And then we will start taking your questions.
As a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question,
wow, Prieto, María del quirófano.
Again, that is star one. 1 minute, please. For
Gracias, un abrazo. María Silvina.
Our first question comes from Elizabeth Howe of space.com. Your line is now open.
Good morning. Not sure who can answer this, but I wanted to find out how those Ingenuity-type helicopters would work, how mechanically they would pick up the samples and do the retrieval. Thanks so much.
¿Cómo va a funcionar el tema?
This is Jeff. My colleague Richard Cook, who is the program manager for Mars Sample Return at JPL, is here with me, and I think he can answer this question.
Sure. So this is Richard. The basic approach is to build a helicopter, or two helicopters actually, that look a lot of ways like
La primera opción es hacer 2 helicópteros para traer las muestras, para recogerlas.
A couple of notable differences. One is that there will be, rather than landing legs, there will be landing legs that include at the bottom of them mobility wheels, basically, some very small wheels that allow the helicopter to traverse across the surface on the ground as well as fly. And secondly, each of the helicopters will have a a little arm, basically, that can reach down and grab
Un helicóptero que tiene ruedas, además,
the sample tubes.
que va a ir con un brazo, inclusive, con un brazo a recoger las muestras.
Scenario that we're talking about where the helicopters are used, each of the helicopters would be able to operate independently.
En el escenario que estamos previendo, cada uno de los helicópteros va a operar independientemente.
The sample tubes roll over to it, pick one up, then fly back to the proximity of the lander, roll up to the lander and drop it in a spot on the ground where
El helicóptero vuela autónomo, recoge la muestra, vuelve al aterrizador y la deja. Cada helicóptero va a hacer vuelos separados durante 3 o 4 días. Salen 1 o 2 salidas y vuelven, 1 o 2 salidas y vuelven.
If I may ask a quick follow-up, what's the primary mission of the 2 helicopters?
¿Cuál es la primera misión de los 2 helicópteros?
The situation that we're talking about is that they would be used as a backup to bring the tubes back to the lander. There's also the possibility that we can do other things with it, in terms of...
Lo primario es que hagan esto y vuelvan al lander. Estamos viendo luego qué podemos llegar a hacer. Oh, qué importante, qué pegada esta teleconferencia.
We are ready for our next question.
Our next question comes from Marcia Dunn, the Associated Press. Your line is now open.
Yes, thank you. I may have missed it in the course of conversation, but when is the targeted launch of the Mars ascent vehicle with the helicopters, and what is the targeted date for getting these samples back on Earth? And was the switch to using Perseverance as the main pickup vehicle and the 2 helos as a backup, was this driven by price savings and or saving time or some reason? Thank you.
So this is Richard Cook. I'll answer the first question, and I think Jeff will answer the second. The planned arrival of SRL on the surface of Mars will be in mid-2030, 2030, and the MAV will launch about a little less than a year later, so early in 2031, leading to a return of samples to the Earth in 2033.
El equipo va a estar aterrizando en el 30, lanzando el año anterior, el mediados del 30. Y las muestras van a volver en el 2033.
What drove that decision to use what you've got instead of having something new coming from Earth? Thanks.
So the plan has always been to use Perseverance, and we had the sample fetch rover as well. We had 2 ways to bring samples back in the architectural revision that we have. We based on the results of our reliability assessment, we're going to plan on using Perseverance as the primary because of what we've seen on the performance we've seen on Mars today, both with Perseverance and Curiosity. So we have confidence that we can count on Perseverance to bring the samples back, and we've added the helicopters as a backup means to assure that in the event of a Perseverance failure, that we can that we still can bring samples back. This mission is simpler, it's less organizationally complex, and we believe now that we have an architecture that, again, is simpler and is going to position us for success based on the analysis we've done.
De acuerdo al análisis que hemos hecho, Perseverance va a estar activo mucho tiempo y eso nos permite diseñar esta misión para poder lograr el éxito, inclusive después del 2030.
Three quick ones about the helicopters. I don't recall the weight of the sample tube. I know it's in a press kit, but I was wondering the max weight.
¿Cuánto pesa cada muestra y qué tanto peso puede llevar o podrá llevar cada helicóptero de esos? ¿Y a qué distancia máxima?
And you keep calling this a backup. I guess what I'm wondering is if Perseverance stays healthy, is there some chance you wouldn't use the helicopters at all? Or would you plan to pick up the...
Sí, y otra pregunta dice, en caso de que Perseverance esté activo, ¿realmente necesitan el helicóptero?
This is Richard again. I can answer the questions. The filled sample tubes are about 100 or less than 150 grams.
150 gramos cada muestra.
Depends on how much, of course, sample is in them, but with a fully filled up tube, it could be as much as 150 grams. I think you asked about the sortie distance. So the maximum distance that we think the helicopters would need to sortie out and back out is like 700 meters. And we've demonstrated flights about that long on Ingenuity, so we know it can make it that far.
Jorge, lo entiendo y son dos cosas totalmente distintas. China va a traer muestras, quizás, vamos a verlo, es muy posible. Pero estos son muestras científicas de lugares específicos donde esperan tener resultados específicos.
The question you asked about the scenarios for which the helicopter are used, it very much depends on how Perseverance has, health looks over the next 8 years, and so that it could range between, only needing to be there to support, the final approach of Perseverance, as well as some of the other things I talked about, or it could be needed to move all of the tubes. Again, depending on what happens with Perseverance's operations over the next 8 years.
El tema de los helicópteros obviamente depende de cómo esté en ese momento el rover Perseverance, si está activo o no. O sea que no solo es necesario, sino que son un buen backup.
Hi, thank you. So I guess this would be for Richard or how. Actually,
¿Qué tal?
Perseverance people. How is this going to affect Perseverance mission, and where would the notional landing spot be? Would it be outside the crater because that's where Percy would be?
¿Dónde sería el sitio de aterrizaje? ¿Fuera del cráter de Hechicero o dentro?
So yeah, many might want to jump in on this too, right? But the basic plan for Perseverance is to continue to do the Jezero Delta.
El Perseverance va a estar dentro del Jezero.
Over the next few months, which will likely be put into a first depot on the surface sometime later this year as a sort of insurance policy, you might say, and then after that, drive up through the rest of the Delta, Jezero Delta, and then eventually leave the crater and go on to the Midway site, which is some of the more ancient terrain on Mars.
Luego de lo que está haciendo el Hechicero va a ir al Delta y del Delta sigue hacia arriba.
Through that whole time frame, and so in fact we could land SRL out, wherever Perseverance ends up, and the intent is that it not come back to Jezero in that case.
En realidad podríamos llegar a aterrizar donde esté el Perseverance, porque él no va a volver luego al Jezero.
Planning for where the samples depot. So the first, you're right. The first depot is most likely going to be in a few months' time within Jezero crater as an insurance policy, and then we'll of course carry the rest of the samples. And of course, Perseverance has been collecting duplicate samples, which means that there'll be a set of rock cores on board that will be duplicates of the ones that are going to be deposited within Jezero, and we'll carry those out with it towards Midway and continue collecting.
Thank you so much. That was Minnie Wadwa, the Mars Sample Return Principal Scientist, and again, Richard Cook, who's the Mars Sample Return Program Manager, who has been invited to answer some of the more detailed questions here today. With that, we will move on to our next question.
Okay, our next question comes from Marina Corinne with The Atlantic. Your line is now open.
Hi, Marina Corinne with The Atlantic. Two questions. So it sounds like Perseverance has got a promotion here. Will the team need to make the rover do any operations and maneuvers that the machine wasn't expected to do? And then second question, Martian helicopters are still, I'd say, a pretty experimental technology. So what would you do in a scenario in which both Perseverance and the new helicopters then fail? Thank you.
Let's start off with Jeff Gramling, and then we may go further with Richard.
So we have the two paths to bring the samples back to our lander for, that we would ultimately use the map to launch them into orbit, those are Perseverance remaining healthy and the helicopters. What was the first part of the question?
The first part was just about the are we changing the way we're going to operate Perseverance? The answer to that is no. That the intent, as many said all along, was for Perseverance to get a great set of scientifically selected samples to provide them to MSR to bring back to the Earth. And so at this point, we expect to continue to operate Perseverance within its tested, operating envelope. So we're not going to try to do new things with it. It's going to continue to perform as we've designed it to do what we want. And I think our overall approach in adding the helicopters, as Jeff said, was to provide a backup capability to what is the prime path of Perseverance, which we have a lot of confidence in, given that it's been operating successfully. And I don't know that he mentioned it, but it's also very much, I think you all know, Perseverance is very, very much of a twin to Curiosity. And the Curiosity rover is coming up on its 10th anniversary on the surface of Mars, I think, next week. And so it has been a good demonstration that a rover of that caliber and that class can survive on the surface of Mars for 10 years.
And then, as I'd mentioned earlier, the plan had always been to have Perseverance bring samples back. So we had two paths. So that part of the plan is not changed.
All right. Thank you so much. On to the next question, please.
Our next question comes from Jeff Foss with Space News. Your line is open.
Good morning, good afternoon. How does this revised architecture affect the projected cost of the overall Mars sample return campaign? How much money are you going to save with one fewer lander and without a fetch rover? Thanks.
Hi, this is Jeff. So obviously, one lander is much less expensive than two. We're still in our preliminary design phase. It's what we call our key decision point C, which will be about a year from now that agency commits to cost. So during that period, we're doing cost estimation, and that's when we commit to a number. So all I can say right now is the obvious is one lander certainly is much less costly than two.
Right, moving on to the next question.
As a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star 1. Our next question comes from
Welcome
Irene
to the conference calling center. Please have your passcode and...
Thanks very much.
Thank you for calling your passcode, please.
I'm a little confused about what Perseverance role in the sample
Thank you for calling your passcode,
campaign. Do the samples that are stored on board, which previously
Please check your mute feature. I'm not able to hear you.
Become the primary sample set that's returned to Earth, or does Perseverance go back to where it's going to be caching samples on the ground?
Please disconnect.
And
try calling again.
And pick those up for return. And then also maybe Jeff or Thomas or Richard, can you just maybe tell us a little bit about the novelty of adding the helicopters to the architecture? Like, how did that come about? Was there reluctance? Was everybody really eager to test it out? Or when did that very unique idea kind of move into what would be the main planning for the campaign? Thanks.
Perhaps I start in this case first, if that's okay. The first thing I want to say, it's Thomas, of course, the head of science at NASA. The first thing is, from the beginning, we always have...
Welcome to the conference calling center.
Please have your I just think that's prudent to do it. Like, remember when we started planning this, we actually hadn't even... There were a number of specific systems, especially mechanical systems, that relate to the sample acquisition and so forth.
No response will be disconnected if you'd like to redial.
Experience with. So our risk analysis, so to say, Perseverance has really been affected by the experience that we've had in the last year. So that is number one. So it's not that Perseverance was not important, and now it's important. We always wanted to have two, and of course, the sample fetch rover was one of the options to do that. The other one with Perseverance, and we wanted to be sure that both options were there. So in that sense, that was not substantial kind of zero thought or change. It was just an evolution of that as we learned about both curiosity but also perseverance. God, I just forgot the second question. Can you remind me?
Yes, I was asking about what happens with the role of perseverance in the sample return if the cache samples aboard previously considered the backup become the prime to get back, or if there's some other role, and then just a little bit about the story of how the helicopter became part of this operational mission. Who thought of that, and how did that idea mature?
So again, I think I tried to address the first question as much as I can, and if others want to add, they should do that. On the helicopters, I just want to say ingenuity was really important for that, right? Because again, when we started planning, helicopters, on Mars were a dream and an aspiration of a technology demonstration. And frankly, there's with the flights that are up there, 2,000 and counting and more, right? We have gotten experience, and then frankly, helicopters as a tool here have really moved in the realm of the possible. But that, by the way, why we do technology demonstration is to take things that were too risky or crazy to think about at the beginning and put them in the realm of the possible. It's just in this case, the timing worked so fortunately that in this conceptual design phase where multiple options are considered, the helicopter option in fact became a reality. That the entire team basically felt comfortable with. Richard, do you want to take it away? Again on the first question I was asked, or Jeff.
Yeah, I'll just sort of repeat and reiterate what you said, right? That the plan all along has been that Perseverance would, after landing, would acquire a set of samples, and many mentioned as two at a time, right? Two for each rock, with the idea that after it had collected, on the order of 10 samples, that it would place, which drives along carrying those samples, it would place the first set of 10-ish in the Jezero area as a so-called first or contingency depot, as a sort of insurance policy. And then it would continue going, carrying the second copy and continuing to acquire new samples to the eventual point where it has used all the tubes. There's a total of 43 tubes on. Over the next 6-7 years are the ones that we want to bring back. And so those are the ones that either we would get directly from Perseverance, either we will get directly from Perseverance, or if Perseverance happens to, if we don't believe it's gonna last that long, then we can put them into a second depot on the surface, at which point then the SRL will land close to it, and it will use the two helicopters to go get those 30 tubes and bring them back to the MAV. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So under the optimal plan, the depot at Jezero Crater, those canisters just remain on Mars.
That's right, and there's certainly hopefully future opportunities to go get them, but we will have duplicate copies of all of those samples that will come back. So we're not, in a sense, missing anything by leaving those there.
Yeah. There's an extra.
Move on to our next question.
Our next question comes from Alexandra Whitsey with Nature Magazine. Your line is now open.
Yeah. Hi, thanks for this. My question is for David Parker. So with the removal of the Fetch rover, when is ESA going to next land a rover on Mars?
Thank you very much, David Parker speaking. It's a great question. I'm afraid I can't answer that with any, definitively now. You're obviously referring to what happens to the Rosalind Franklin rover, which right now is sitting in the clean room in Thales Alenia Space in Turin, waiting for its trip to Mars. I can say that since the decision to discontinue or suspend the cooperation with Roscosmos in the spring. The engineering team has been working at great speed to find an alternative approach for delivering the Rosalind Franklin rover to Mars, and we've reported on that most recently to our governing council just a few weeks ago. And I would like to say that because it's been said already by the Director General of ESA and indeed the Administrator of NASA, that there's been some excellent discussions between NASA and ESA to explore the different options for getting Rosalind Franklin to Mars. And we still think that is something that we should try to do. But eventually it will be a decision for our member states to decide at our upcoming ESA Ministerial Council meeting in Paris towards the end of this year, in November this year.
Thanks.
Thank you. We will move on to our next question.
Our next question comes from Marcia Smith. Your line is now open.
Thanks so much. My question is along those same lines for the ESA representatives. So are you relieved that you don't have to build the sample fetch rover because now you can invest more in getting the ExoMars rover there? Or are you disappointed? How are you feeling about all this change?
Well, maybe I should have a go at that question, and maybe Francois may want to follow up. The engineer in me was fascinated by the sample fetch rover because it was designed to travel much faster than previous Mars rovers, probably about 4 or 5 times as quickly over the surface. But equally, from a program management point of view, as soon as it became clear that the sample fetch rover could not be accommodated alongside the Mars Ascent vehicle, and therefore it would imply a second launch, a second lander, and so forth. That implies cost and risk, and programs don't like cost and risk. So finding a way to balance out the cost and risk by undertaking the mission without the sample fetch rover makes a great deal of programmatic sense. So I think that summarizes our perspective, but Francois, you may have some thoughts as well.
Thank you, David. Maybe one angle to answer the question is also to say, okay, we had reached preliminary design review with this sample fetch rover development with Airbus in the UK. So indeed, we have a number of technologies that were developed, risks that were mitigated. We have even headboards related to locomotion or related to sample fetching, meaning robotics again. That were achieved by the Airbus UK industry. But everything is not lost because those developments could be very much valid if we would reroute them in the future to another kind of mission, like conceiving a rover mission to the moon. As you are aware, ESA will propose as part of the exploration program at the ministerial end of November, the ministerial that David mentioned before, a large lunar lander, which would have the aim to carry to the moon either cargo or payloads or payloads that could be as well roving vehicles. So we are going to study now together with Airbus UK how basically to redirect the know-how that was developed in the past, in the last 2.5 years, in order to see how we could reuse those activities and the outcome of those risk mitigation and breakdowns in order to prepare potentially for a new development that will be targeted to another planet.
Thank you so much. We will move on to the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question comes from Leo Enright with Irish Television. Your line is now open.
Thanks very much. I think this is probably for David Parker. Just trying to understand the role of the sample transfer arm. I mean, there was to be an arm on the Fetch rover. This is obviously not the same arm. Can you just describe how this arm what role it will play? And is this a new addition, or was this always part of the MAV design? I wasn't entirely clear. And if I could maybe just sort of be more precise, my understanding is that in a perfect situation, the Perseverance rover will back up to the MAV, and the European STA will reach out and take each sample. Am I broadly correct in everything I say there? I hope I am.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Leo. Yes, absolutely. The last point is a correct understanding. And indeed, the sample transfer arm has always been part of the foreseen architecture. So it's been studied by two different industrial contractors, and then we've moved forward with the preferred contractor signing the full development contract last week in Farnborough. Separately, the sample fetch rover would have had an arm to pick up sample tubes. But again, so that's no longer required. So yes, the sample transfer arm, fully extended, it's something like 2.5 meters of reach. It's a multi-joint